Hi everyone, and welcome to our first biology video tutorial. I'm super excited that we are finally moving on to bio. I hope that the chemistry project went okay for you guys. We're going to start today with a little refresher on cells and see what you can remember, see if we can learn some new things. So grab the note that I posted with this on Google Classroom and we'll get started. So first of all, I want you to think about this question. What characteristics do living things have in common? And this is all living things. So plants, animals, fungi, bacteria. What do all living things have in common? I want you to press pause right now and try to think about that. See if you can come up with a little list in your mind. Okay, let's fill out that list. So some characteristics of all living things. Living things have a lifespan. We are all born, and at some point we will all die. We all grow, reproduce, and repair. So everything grows throughout its life. It can have the option of reproducing, and repairing means that we are able to, if we're injured, we're able to repair our bodies. We can sense and respond to changes in the environment. So we as humans are very aware of our surroundings, and we can see, we can smell, we can touch things, and we can respond to those things. You may not think of plants as being able to sense and respond to the environment, but they definitely do. If you've ever seen sunflowers slowly turn towards wherever the sun is, or they can secrete chemicals to get rid of bugs when they feel bugs chewing at them. So all living things are able to sense and respond to changes in their environment. All living things require energy. So we all need energy to live. Without energy, we couldn't function, we couldn't repair, we couldn't do any of these other things. So energy is super important. We produce waste. And lastly, and most importantly for today's lesson, is that we are all composed of cells. So what is a cell? Let's refresh. A cell is the basic unit of structure and function for all living things. So if you think about chemistry, our kind of basic unit that we've been talking about was the atom. And though cells are made up of atoms, we consider the cell to be the basic unit of structure for living things. It's kind of as small as we go. Let's watch my favorite, a quick clip from Bill Nye.
Did you know that all the plants and animals in the world are made of cells? Tiny compartments of life that make up all living things, like you and me and rabbits. Oh, by the way, do you know how you catch a rabbit? You lie in the grass and make noises like a carrot. Yeah, my sister told me that joke. That's a good one, isn't it, Peter?
I haven't told it.
Anyway, animals have all different kinds of cells that do all different kinds of jobs. Like a rabbit will have fur-making cells, and eye cells, and nose cells, and ear cells. I guess rabbits have a lot of ear cells. And carrots are made of cells too. I guess carrots have a lot of carrot cells. Now you and I are a lot more like a rabbit than a carrot. Thank you. Because we're made of animal cells. Now what do cells look like? Well, you're looking at me and I'm made of cells. Okay. Whenever you look in a mirror, you're looking at you and you're made of cells. Snakes are made of cells. And plants and trees are made of cells. In fact, this building's being held up by cells. See this wooden pillar? It's cut from a tree that was made of cells. Now, you and I have about 100 trillion cells in us. Just think how many cells are in this tree. Just think how many cells are in something as big as this whale. Whoa! These are blood cells. See, different cells have different jobs. Sure, we got bone cells, and cheek cells, and lung cells, and heart cells, liver cells, stomach cells, large intestine cells, small intestine cells. The list goes on. I'm trying to sell you on the idea of cells. See, get that? Are you buying it? See that? Cell on cells. You with me there? That's comedy. Cells are just like bricks. That's right. They're piled up in big structures. looks like a brick wall. Except there's a difference between cells and bricks. Cells are alive. And they reproduce. They make new cells. Of course, some cells are dying off, but new cells come along all the time. Suppose you're in a situation where the bricks were piling up. In other words, more cells were being born than were dying off. Then your brick wall would be getting bigger and bigger. It would be growing, just like you. You're growing. So, I'm exhausted. Bricks! More and more cells! See, cells are just like bricks, only different.
Okay, gotta love Bill Nye. So let's just talk a little bit about that analogy. So a cell to an organism is like a brick to a house. So literally when we were saying it's the building block, it's the basic unit, so it's something that's going to build an entire organism. When we put a whole bunch of cells together, it can create an organism. And just like if we were to put a whole bunch of bricks together, we can build a house. Now, one thing that I want to point out from that video that is super important is this idea of specialized cells. And we're going to talk a little bit about that later. But this idea that we've got different, not all our cells look the same. We've got lots of different cells that are doing different jobs in our bodies. Okay, so let's define cell theory. First is that all living things are composed of one or more cells. So we can have very simple organisms like bacteria that are composed of only one cell, or we can have very complex multicellular organisms like us, like humans. The cell, like we said, is the basic unit of life, and all cells come from pre-existing cells. So this is kind of like what we were talking about in chemistry, how matter cannot be created or destroyed. Cells don't just pop out of thin air. All cells come from pre-existing cells that divide to make new cells. So in biology, when we're talking about systems and bodies and how they're put together, we can kind of define them in this organization hierarchy. So that means we're moving from simple to complex. So let's break that down using this picture. So I think these are blanks on your sheet. So when we start super zoomed in, this as zoomed in really as we can go with a microscope, we're going to be looking at cells. So that's our basic unit for biology. When we have a whole bunch of specialized cells with one job working together, we create something called a tissue. So for example, if we have a whole bunch of muscle cells working together, we can create a muscle tissue. When we have a whole bunch of tissues that are working together, we can create an organ. So the stomach has 4 different layers of tissue in it, and they each do different jobs. Once we put a whole bunch of organs together, we can create an organ system. So the stomach is part of the digestive system, and that involves a whole bunch of different organs that work together to digest and absorb our food. And then lastly, when we put all of the different body systems together, that's when we get this complete big picture, the organism. And this organism would not be complete without any of these steps. We need to have all of the systems working together. We need all of our organs to be functioning, and we need all our cells to be living and to be doing what they need to be doing. So this is just to define each of those levels a little bit further. So like I mentioned, the tissue is a group of specialized cells with a similar structure and function. So we're not going to be pairing up a red blood cell with a stomach muscle cell and trying to make them work together. That doesn't make any sense. We want a whole bunch of cells that do the same job to be together. An organ is a group of tissues that work together, and an organ system is one or more organs that work together to perform a vital body function. Oops. Okay, so this hopefully is a refresher. You may have to dig deep in your mind for this, but we're gonna dive into the cell and look at all the tiny parts that are inside the animal cell and the plant cell. And so on your note, you should see a picture of an animal cell and a plant cell, and as we go through each organelle, I want you to add this label to the diagram with a little instruction. So don't worry about that. This isn't the same picture that's on your sheet. But this can be a good reference point if you guys come back to this spot in the video to see what each of these organelles looks like, so that you can draw those labels on your own diagram. So we're going to go one by one and we're going to talk about each of these. But first of all, let's just define an organelle. So what even is that? What am I talking about? So an organelle is a tiny structure within a cell that performs a specific function. So even within the cell, we have these tiny little parts that each have their own job, that each do different things in the cell. So we're going to try to remember what each of these little things does. So first up is the cell membrane, and so that's going to be just basically the outer layer. You can really draw your arrow anywhere there, this outer layer of the cell, and it's double layered. There's 2 layers around each of our cells, and its job is to contain and protect all of the organelles inside. It helps the cell to hold its shape, and it has certain openings. You can't really see on this picture, but it has certain openings all around it that allow certain materials in and out. If we think about things that we might want to let in, we want to let in oxygen, we want to let in nutrients from our food, we want to let in water, and things we might want to get rid of could include carbon dioxide or different waste products. So the cell membrane is super important. Next up, we have the nucleus, which is this big guy. So look for the sort of biggest looking organelle in your picture, and that's the nucleus. And so that is the control center of the cell. It directs all cell activity, and it contains the genetic material. So all of our DNA, all of our genes are contained in there, and that acts as instructions for the rest of our cell. We wouldn't be able to do any of the functions in our cell without the nucleus. Everyone's favorite, the powerhouse of the cell, is the mitochondria. So to provide a little bit more information for the mitochondria, specifically it's using food and oxygen to produce energy. So it can't just produce energy out of thin air. This is why we need to breathe and why we need to eat, so that our mitochondria can use those 2 things to be able to produce energy for our cells to function. Next up, we have a vacuole, which kind of just looks like a bubble. It might be one of the harder ones to pick out, but it's a bubble that stores waste, water, and other substances. Mostly water, and you'll notice something with this when we look at plants and animal cells. I won't give it away yet. Next, we have ribosomes, which are the tiny little dots. So wherever you see the tiny little dots, those are ribosomes, and they are responsible for making proteins that are needed for cell functions. So they're really cool little guys. They take the instructions from our nucleus, and they use those instructions to build proteins, and proteins are basically what do all the functions that happen in the cell. Next up, we have the Golgi bodies, or Golgi bodies, and I always think that they kind of look like pancakes. So they are responsible for processing and packaging materials to be transported around the cell or out of the cell, and they are usually attached to the membrane. So because that makes sense, they're going to be transporting things in and out, so they need to have close contact with our cell membrane. Then we have endoplasmic reticulum, and that's a long kind of scary bio word, so I always like to break those up. Endo means in the, plasmic means plasma, reticulum means network. So this is a network in the plasma of the cell. So basically, It's a network of tube-like structures that help to transport materials around the cell. They're kind of like the roads that we can travel on in the cell. They provide this network of different paths that allow things to get around the cell wherever they need to go. And there's two types. There's rough ER, so there's a rough endoplasmic reticulum, which means that it's covered in ribosomes. So you can see this darker pink one here is covered in dots, so that would be the rough ER, or there's also smooth ER, so there's no ribosomes here. Then we have the cytoplasm. So that is basically the space in between all the organelles. And it's filled with this jelly-like liquid that suspends all organelles inside of it. Okay, so here is a picture of both an animal cell and a plant cell. And I want you guys to pause and see if you can come up with 3 differences between them. Okay, let's see what you came up with. So, 3 major differences between plant and animal cells involve, the first one is that plant cells have a cell wall and animals don't. So on your picture of the plant cell, it needs to have all of the same labels that you just added to the animal cell, but it also needs an extra one. It needs something called the cell wall. And this is an extra layer around the outside. So it still has a cell membrane, but this extra layer around the cell membrane that's a lot stiffer. It has a lot more of a structure to it. And so that's called the cell wall. Then plants have chloroplasts and animal cells don't. And chloroplasts kind of look like that. And if you think about a function that plant cells do that animals can't, it's photosynthesis. So these are the little guys that are responsible for photosynthesis. They can turn the sun's energy into energy for, or food essentially for the plant cell. And then lastly, plant cells have a much larger vacuole than animal cells. So you'll see this massive bubble here that almost takes up most of the space in the cell. In the plant cell is the vacuole, whereas in the animal cell, it was kind of tiny little circles. So that's something to note. Plant cells hold a lot more, plant cell vacuoles hold a lot more water inside them. And that also helps the plant cell to hold its shape as well. Okay, we're going to end this video with a ridiculous song that will hopefully help you guys to remember all of these organelles that we just talked about.
I went into a cell to get out of the rain, and there was the gatekeeper, the cell membrane. I went into a cell, and what did I see? The mitochondria, it's the energy factory. I went into a cell and said, who drives this bus? And found myself talking to the boss, the nucleus. I went into a cell to recover from a spasm, and found myself swimming in some clear cytoplasm. I went into a nucleus to ask how to get home, and got genetic info stored in a chromosome. I went into a cell, and stretching oh so far was a thin and wavy network. It's called the ER. I went into a cell trying not to be perplexed by the packaging and sorting in the Golgi complex. I went into a cell and said, who makes proteins here? And somebody responded, it's the ribosome, my dear. I went into a cell and was feeling pretty fine till a lysosome engulfed me and dissolved me in enzymes. I went into a cell and was feeling pretty nimble till a centriole lassoed me, tying me up in a spindle. I went into to a plant cell to see how trees get so tall. And all around the outside was a rigid cell wall. I went into a plant cell. Why is it so green, I asked. 'Cause I make food from sunlight, said a green chloroplast. I went into a plant cell to see how plant cells store food, when a vacuole informed me that he was the storage dude. So when you go inside a cell, remember what you see. There's over 1 trillion cells in both you and me. Just sing this song if you ever feel confusion. And remember, active transport is the opposite of diffusion.
All right, you're welcome for making your day. For making your day a little bit cringier. So I'm gonna post the answers to the pictures, the diagrams that are on the second sheet, so you guys can check for that. Also, the last page is just a little way to also help you remember these. So something that I like to do is to kind of create an analogy. So if you go to the last sheet of the note, there's a little activity where you can compare the organelles that we just talked about to a city. So give that a try. I will post my answers for that as well sometime soon. It doesn't have to be the same as yours. As long as you're able to justify what you think, then that is the main thing. All right, thanks for watching and stay tuned for the next one.